28 years later, the Bone Temple picks up where we left off with Spike and the Jimmies. It also dives deeper into Dr. Kelson's story and the insanity that is the Jimmies cult. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so we were both really curious about this one because 28 years later was a solid film overall, but the ending was so just kind of out of left field. Like you have the Teletubby Power Rangers coming in and flipping and doing all these weird acts and stuff. And like, okay, that's where we're going to leave it off. Like we got Spike has been surrounded by the Jimmies, but I have to say I was pleasantly surprised how they handled everything in here. Like you really still got the insanity and the craziness of them, but you get to dive. This was very much about the psychology of the world and of the characters and everything. And I mean, we start right off with Spike in a pool with the Jimmies, and you know, Jimmy Crystal, the leader of the Jimmies, is forcing Spike to fight one of the other Jimmies, and it's either you kill the other person and you're now a finger of the hand of the Jimmies, or you die. Like, there is no living with the Jimmy cult. You either join them if they have space for it, or you're dead. And it started right off just out of the gate, hitting the ground running.
Yeah, definitely didn't take its time just jumping right into the action. Obviously, we're gonna throw this with a very heavy spoiler. We have to talk about kind of a lot of the beats of the movie and the things to kind of make sense of what all's going on in this world. So, heavy spoiler alert, obviously, as we dive into this. But yeah, man, it wastes absolutely no time. And just kicking right in with this intense showdown with Spike and the Jimmies, like, it gets very brutal very quickly, and it doesn't stop. This is a very violent and brutal movie. I think even more violent and brutal than I was expecting, because it gets very, very dark and intense at times. It starts dealing with heavier themes of the satanic cult and, you know, what the Jimmies actually are and who Jimmy as a character is. I gotta say right off the bat, though, man, Jack O'Connell is absolutely fantastic in this movie. For a guy who doesn't have a whole lot of acting credits under his belt, he's got two really solid performances in the past year with his performance in Sinners, as well as his performance as Jimmy Crystal here, Sir Jimmy Crystal here, as he likes to call himself.
Lord of Darkness.
Exactly. And he's just so good. He just chews up everything that he's in. He's just this really empowered, like, he gives off such powerful performances in these. Like, it's just phenomenal. You would think he's been in major films for a long time. He's just absolutely incredible in this role here. And you just go into this dive of who Jimmy is and kind of what happens, like how he has all these people under his thumb and just in the most intense and brutal and dark ways that you can think of. And, you know, we get to that point where what happens with him later, and we'll get into that a little further on, but man, it's just such an interesting character story that he goes through in this film that is kind of, I would say, half centered around what's going on with him and half of what's going on the other side of it too, if you want to break into that. But what are your thoughts on Jimmy, man? Like, it was such an interesting character.
Yeah, I mean, especially since a lot of his performance here is very subdued in a way. Like, he's kind of just sitting back and listening and watching, but you can see the intensity in his eyes, especially when he doesn't get his way and people talk back to him or don't do what he wants. You can just feel the intensity from him. So, yeah, he did a fantastic job. Like, we barely got a glimpse of him at 28 years later, but this was basically a tale of kind of two different stories in a way. You had the Jimmy cult, and then you had Dr. Kelson and Samson. And then that was kind of the main part of it. Spike kind of gets put to the back burner a little bit. He's part of it, but he's stuck in this Jimmy cult, and he can't really find a way out because, as I said, they don't let anybody who meets them go. It's either fight and die or you get charity, and the charity is intense. Like, it's some of the, like, I looked away at one point because one of the charities that happens in a barn just had me like, all right, I don't need to see any more because that is it's
graphic.
I didn't even the sound effects. Like, I looked away with one part going and you hear the sound effects, what happened. I'm like, okay, yeah, they went there. Like, you could just feel it. It was brutal, but I mean, yeah, the Jimmy cult was really interesting because you got into it, as you mentioned, that Jimmy Crystal believes that his dad is Satan and that Satan is the one who unleashed the infection all around. It's also really interesting, kind of jumping ahead here, though, but not spoiling much. You actually get zombie mentioned in here in this film and stuff, and I don't think any of the others they've ever mentioned them other than being infected. They just called them, the infected or the virus or all that. So you actually get a zombie reference in here, which I was kind of surprised to hear when it was belted out. But you still get a good amount of them, but it really focuses hard on Samson the Alpha and the Jimmies, and it had me engrossed and entertained all the way throughout.
Yeah, it's such a powerful movie. I was really wondering what the follow-up to 28 Years Later was going to be, because I think we agree it was good, but it was kind of a mixed bag based on like all the hype that we had around it, based on how much we love, like 28 Days Later and even 28 Weeks Later. Like we were wondering like how good it was going to be, and it was still a fine movie, but I would put this above 28 Years Later instantly.
I would give it
as far as like intensity and everything like that, because it's very brutal. Like the Jimmy Cult itself is such a fascinating case of just like this dark-minded individual who like has this just grip on people, like having them doing his bidding and just like has them completely brainwashed.
His bidding is nasty,
and it's intense, and it's brutal and graphic in the most graphic way. If you could think of something graphic, it is more graphic. Like they do not shy away from that in this movie at all. But then, like you said, we have the exact other side of it, which is Dr. Kelson and Samson's story. And you have Dr. Kelson here who's kind of going about his business, but he's also trying to understand Samson now that there's kind of this forming connection between the two of them. Like, you see Dr. Kelson at this point has a theory that he's trying to pull this humanity back out of Samson. Like, if I can turn the alpha, maybe I can save everyone, kind of in his own way here. And he starts learning through his interactions with Samson here that he may be able to find a cure for the sickness here. And it's a really, really interesting dynamic between the two of them in this movie that takes place throughout the entire through line of the film when we're not dealing with the Jimmy stuff. And Dr. Kelson, I got to say, Ray Fiennes is a phenomenal actor anyway, but he's such an interesting character in it's not just the last film, but this film especially. He's very interesting in how he goes about his business.
Yeah, it's a fantastic performance by Ralph Fiennes there. He did an amazing job because there's subtlety and there's softness to Dr. Kelson. He's also kind of being a medical professional because he's looking over and he's tending to Samson's wounds, but he's also watching and observing him to see what the concoction that he's shot the dart into him, what it's doing to him, and is watching his movement and his eyes and everything. Like he's basically experimenting on him throughout the movie, but in a humane way, because there's a really it's a really interesting story here. It does take a little bit to get going, to wonder, to figure out exactly where they're going with the story. But once it hits that stride, you get really interested in it, especially because of, Dr. Ian's stuff, is that he's still got humanity to him, even though he's covered in iodine and looking like the devil, and he's killing, boiling people alive and hanging, or not alive, but boiling their bones after they've passed and putting up the temple and everything else. Like, you think there's a bit of psychoticness to him.
For sure.
But you get this subtlety, and like one really scene that hit home was that, he had a drug that he wanted to give to Samson. And he asked, he's like, is there any way that you could give me consent to do this? Like, you're in the middle, almost 30 years into an apocalypse event of people being turned into these bloodthirsty creatures, and you've got one of the biggest, baddest of all, but he's still trying to hold on to that humanity by wanting to ask the alpha for consent to give him this medication. And it just kind of shows that he's still trying to hold on to the little bit of humanity that's left out there in the world.
For sure. And as part of these experiences, he's trying to draw any type of humanity out of Samson here. Like he's trying to get him to respond, and he sees almost like a little bit of a flicker of a light come on in him, and it almost seems like he's at the point, like you said, with the needle that he tries to give him. Like he feels like he's failing, like he's running out of time and options here, and if this doesn't work, he's going to have to put him down just to kind of preserve his own life, because once he runs out of this medicine, then he's not going to be able to stop Samson from coming after him, basically. And you see the way it plays out there, and he winds up not giving him the needle there in a really interesting way to kind of turn the story on its head a little bit. And it kind of makes you wonder what if, because spoiler alert, there's another film to come after this, but as we've already talked about, that's not really a spoiler that another film is coming, but like you see, like based on the events of how this movie ends, you wonder like what if, like had they been able to mass produce something like this concoction that would have worked, that would have helped bring a little bit of humanity out of Samson and maybe have him come out of his sickness and become human again. And it's a definite what if case for what could have happened going forward. But it's such a cool story with those two, because it was a direction I definitely did not anticipate this movie going in, but it was a very fascinating story on that end that I was surprised they went there with it.
And like you said, 28 years later was kind of a tale of two different stories, because you had the first part as a dad and a son going out onto the island for the first time and hunting and gathering and doing all the stuff. And he's introduced to the alphas and the creatures and everything. But then when they return home, it turns into like, the dad's cheating and the mom is in a rough spot. So he decides he's going to take the mom out to see the doctor and try to get her a cure and stuff. But it definitely felt like tonally almost like two separate films and how they did it. And this one was very consistent throughout, because you mainly were jumping back and forth between the Jimmies and Dr. Kelson's, but it was very much related as we kind of get in the big crescendo ending that was wild and crazy and over the top with what it did. Like, I came into this movie expecting zero dancing, and we got 100% more dancing than I expected. There's dancing, there's humor, there's laughs, but there's also darkness and softness. Like I said, with Ralph Fiennes, he was a perfect guy to be able to balance this character out between being a doctor, being a lone guy who's out here building bone temples, but also looking, trusting an alpha like Samson to not kill him, because he's like, all right, I'm going to trust that you're not going to hurt me. And he puts that trust to the test in multiple times. But yeah, going through with Jimmy, because everybody in the Jimmy cult is Jimmy. It's Jemima, Jimmy. Like, there's a much deeper and interesting story with him as we get to see, is that it is a cult. It is a guy who thinks he can commune with the devil, and that the devil is guiding his hand in everything that he does, and that it's the devil telling him to kill all these people and do all these really disturbing things to other people. And you've got Spike, who's just having to sit here and watch. And listen, that's probably my only somewhat small annoyance with the film, is that, the first film was all about Spike's journey and where he's going, and he kind of really became a side character in the second one. Now we know, especially after watching the movie here, exactly where all of that story is going, but you kind of just have him being dragged around for a little under 2 hours.
Yeah.
Like it worked, and you get some good moments with him and stuff, but for the most part, he's just kind of a prisoner just along for the ride. Now you get him trying to bring out a little bit of humanity in at least one of the Jimmies, Jimmy Inc. and everything, but I kind of expected Spike to do a little bit more in this film than he did.
Yeah, I mean, this film, in a nutshell, if you're looking at it as a continuous timeline, you have like the through line of the main story here, and this felt like more of a detour. Like it's almost like a side quest, film. It was like, well, we're going to come back to this. We're going to come back to where you think we kind of left off with Spike and everything moving forward. And this is kind of like a side detour where Spike goes on a little bit of a side quest, and it all kind of culminates in the way that the film culminates, and then you see where Spike is going in the next film and how that's tying into some very exciting stuff that I'm very excited to see. And this kind of just felt like he took an off ramp that he took the off ramp before the off ramp he needed to go on. What I mean? And that's kind of how I would explain this film. But in a vacuum, this film's just so good, man. It's got a little bit of everything, like you said. It's got the absurdness. It is got a little bit of the humor and the comedy kind of mixed in, and the kind of dark comedy a little bit.
Very dark comedy.
Like it's very tonally dark throughout the film, and you have this bombastic cult leader Jimmy who is essentially trying to sell his people on the idea that he can commune with the devil, and very justifiably they're like, hey, we want to talk, we want to meet them, meet this old Nick that you keep referring to. And he's kind of stringing them along, like, yeah, we'll meet him. And then through the happenstance, one of the Jimmies comes across the guy that appears to be old Nick, dancing around in a field with with Samson, which is you're 100% more dancing than expected, and that's kind of where you get the congruence of the two stories here. Is where the one Jimmy kind of ventures off on her own. She finds Dr. Kelson out in the field with Samson, communing with one of his demons, as she likes to report back and say, and she believes that Dr. Kelson is Satan here, and now they're like, okay, we found him. We found old Nick. Take us to him. Like, can we get an audience with the devil kind of thing? And it works out in a very, very epic way when they finally kind of drag Jimmy along, because you kind of see Jimmy kind of backed into a corner a little bit here amongst his own people. Like, hey, you tell us you're going to him. We found him. Let's go see him. Why can't we? And he's like, yeah, great. Let's go meet this guy. And then like it just gets absolutely crazy, like even crazier, like not in a brutal way, but crazy in like just like storytelling way when it gets to that point where those two worlds actually do converge.
Yeah, I did like that you could see the wheels turning, the gears turning in his head whenever he's kind of not exactly called out, but he can tell that they're not exactly believing him or listening to him. He's always testing to see what kind of control he has over, because there's a moment where Spike defies him and he's just lifts his hand and says, should I talk to old Nick here and see what he has to say? And you see the fear in their eyes, and there's always that testing. And when it came to that moment, he's like, okay, how do I, as a cult leader would, well, you've got something that you weren't planning on and expecting, and now you have to try to figure out exactly how you're going to handle this situation. And it was a really interesting conversation and piece when those two worlds did collide because of everything. You got almost a little bit of, as you got Samson's humanity being looked at from Dr. Kelson, you kind of got Jimmy's humanity being looked at, because he does talk in that soft manner and the way that everyone feels like they can talk to him and confide into him. And he got Jimmy to open up and go through some trauma and memories and everything else. Like I said, this is a very psychological film. Like, even though there's horror and there's jump scares and other stuff like that, it's a little bit more toned down compared to the first film. It doesn't have as many as of the zombie runners. You get some good scenes out of it, though. But it's very much diving into the psychology of people in this world. Not only just that, but also about, are we still looking for a cure? Are we still trying to find a way to do medicine and do things like that? But yeah, Ralph Fiennes and Jack O'Connell really carried this film. Like, their performances were so good. But also give it up to G. Lewis Perry, who was Samson. Like, you think you've got this alpha zombie who's just big and foreboding and screaming and going around, and gets some very brutal murder sequences from him in this. But he slowly really started to show a different side of him and Samson, and especially when he's in that drug-induced trance of trying to, you're seeing a little bit of flip of like, all right, there's the evil zombie Samson, but here's a little bit of his humanity, but right back into it. And I think he performed very well for like having little to nothing to say but grunts and stuff. Like, he performed really well in here.
Yeah, he gives a fantastic performance as well. Yeah, I want to give a little love to Erin Kellyman as well, who's one of the main Jimmys here, and she's been in several other things. Obviously, she's got one of those, like, where you've seen her kind of faces. Like, she's been in several things that you're like, oh yeah, I know where she's been in. But she's fantastic as like the one who's really starting to have a problem with the way the Jimmys are doing things, and trying to find a way to get away from Jimmy, because it's really hard to do, man. Like, he's got such a grip on these people that anyone that tries to defy and run away gets taken out like immediately or brutally, or has their spot challenged by someone who he may see as more easily manipulated, is easily able to manipulate, and have them challenge for a spot in the Jimmys there. And it gets very intense. Like, it really does. And then it comes to a head here when those two worlds emerge, where like Jimmy's like desperate to continue to, have his grip on his cult here. And he gets Dr. Kelson here to kind of sell the lie a little bit here. It's just like, hey, like, it very brutally like tells Dr. Kelson, he's like, you're going to go along with this and I'll let you live. But if you don't, you're not going to make it out of this kind of thing. And you get to see this just unbelievably insane just performance that he gives. And I don't want to spoil any of that for people because that's just such a really cool scene. Awesome visual spectacle and an iconic metal song that plays during it to try to sell himself as the devil to the rest of the Jimmies. And it's a very funny, it was very very over the top in its not only visual spectacle but just over the top performance. It was a lot of fun. And then, you know, when he's embodying the devil to try to play along with this, you very much get you get flashbacks to his time as Voldemort in Harry Potter. And I know we were just kind of low key joking off to the side. I was like, I was waiting for him to say, "Oh, what I could ever," you know, or just something like crazy, like in the middle of that, because he just you feel that from him. You feel that grandioseness as he's trying to play the Lord of Darkness, and he was, you know, he who shall not be named. So you see him kind of embodying that a little bit, and I kind of smiled because I was just like, man, that takes me back to different days when he was, you know, Voldemort in the Potter films. But such a good moment there. That was a lot of fun too.
Yeah, I think Nia DaCosta did a fantastic job stepping in to handle the second film. Like, it was filmed back to back with the other one. We didn't really get a timeline of where this is set, but it's days to weeks to, I would say, maybe max a month or two. I wouldn't even go that far out. It feels like it's a couple days or maybe a week, because we saw Spike getting captured at the end, and he's still kind of on the outs with him. And as we went through the film here, Jimmy doesn't allow too many people to live for very long in his presence. Like, when he finds you, that's kind of the end of it for your group and your people and stuff. And like I said, I just really loved how they went through the psychology and breaking down. Even though some of the Jimmies didn't have a whole lot to do, you got to see different aspects of them, of kind of where they are psychologically, of how far broken or gone are they? Are they deeply under Jimmy Crystal's spell, or are they still just kind of on the edge? Like, how far are each of them willing to go? And you get to see that in several different ways of just how far they're willing to go. And you see some cracks and some breakage and all that. And yeah, you really get Jimmy trying to figure out how to keep his cult going, because, as I said, if he runs into somebody that he feels like, okay, I'm going to let you challenge, to either you challenge one of my Jimmies and you kill him, you become a Jimmy, or you die. Like, the psychological nature of that, to like, oh, I'm just going to sacrifice, and they sacrifice themselves willingly to go into these fights and battles. There's no, like, you can't talk back, you cannot do anything. You have to have 100% faith and belief in what Jimmy's, you know, Sir Lord Jimmy Crystal is telling you to do, and that you have to do it even if it costs you your life. And there's such an interesting way that they dissect and look at that, by not like fully going deep dive into it, but you can see all the different layers of it all as it goes on. And I think that was a kind of a brilliant way to take us from what was, as said, a father and son adventure, then a son and mom adventure, and bringing that in. And this is really about the psychological part of living in a world that's as crazy, even though it's like, as we've learned, that it's basically just the UK and that area that's been quarantined. The rest of the world is still okay. But none of them really know that, because there's a lot of stuff that they did in here and stuff that they did in the first one that's going to be really interesting to see where they go in the third, because we do at the very end of the movie, and I don't want to spoil what we get at the very, very end, but we get introduced to some characters that are going to play a big part in part 3, because we do have some characters from 28 years later that we know are still alive but didn't show up in here. So we've got kind of the continuation of their story. We have, you know, what's happening in these two, but you also have the overall arching story of the 28 days, weeks, years later story that they have to go through. And I'm curious to see the way it's setting up. It doesn't feel like the third is going to be a finale to me. It feels like there's more to be done in this world after the third. I think they could potentially wrap it up in there. It hasn't been that overly deep to have all this stuff, but it feels like a world that could continue on for longer than these 3 that they had planned.
Yeah, it's very possible, but I am very excited with the way this film ends. That it got a fist pump in the air for me. Like, when you got, when he gets revealed, what gets revealed, and how elements from previous films are being incorporated into this third trilogy film. You can kind of read between the lines if you know who's supposed to be involved in other films, but it's very exciting to see where they go forward from here, because you have kind of the resolution of the Jimmy and Kelson story, and we're kind of going back to Spike here. Spoiler alert: Spike makes it through the film, but like you get the continuation of his story now that he's kind of away from this Jimmy situation, where he's going to go now, because now you've gotten away from just one threat that you're having to deal with, and there's so many other threats around that you have to deal with, and especially with all the infected that are still around, and a very real threat to your life here. And it's interesting to see how that's merging with what they merged with at the end of this film, to see how they carry forward into the third one. I'm excited, man. It's an exciting direction that they're going with. I really like how they kind of brought it back to where we want it to go moving forward. But yeah, this was a good, solid side quest film that told a really good story. It was very brutal, like I said, and now we're going back to the main storyline here, and we're moving forward, and I'm excited to see where they go with it, because there's some really cool possibilities you could do, because now you've got people interacting that it makes sense for them to interact now, and I'm excited to see where they take it and run with it from there, because who knows how long it's going to take for this other film to get made and get put out, but I'm excited for whatever they throw at us next.
Yeah, because the first 28 Years Later came out last June, and we got this one in January, so 7 months, 8 months in between there, but they haven't filmed anything for the third. Or
correct.
I mean, they could have some B-roll stuff that they, might utilize from these two films, but yeah, we don't know when, because they kind of said the first two really have to perform before they really can see if the third one's going to be a possibility. And I think even before Bone Temple came out, they said they already got the green light to move forward with it. So yeah, we don't know when it's going to start production, how long it's going to take, especially we don't know how grandeur, how big it's going to be. Compared to these first two, it's still going to be pretty grounded with that more independent type of, smaller filmmaking style. Like I really enjoyed from 28 Years Later and this, of how it kept the spirit and the style of the original two alive in here, and did a really fantastic job overall. Like I wasn't sure what to expect after that ending on 20 Years Later, and it surprised me with how much I enjoyed where they went with it, even though it was a pretty simple story in a way, that it just had me intrigued because of Jack O'Connell's performance and of how good Ralph Fiennes was.
Yeah, it's a breezy, just under 2 hour watch. Like it's a film that had me enthralled the entire time, and the first one wasn't as enthralling, I would say. Like 28 Years Later wasn't as enthralling as this one was. I got to say, I enjoyed this one just a little bit more if we have to compare the two, because they came out so close together. We really weren't sure what we were going to get from this movie when it came out, because we had such a mixed reaction, especially with the hard pivot at the end. I think we really enjoyed the film up until just completely getting like sucker punched by the cult of Jimmy's here showing up at the end. But now that we've got this, I feel a little bit better about the first film as well, like just knowing where we're going in the story. And that's kind of the difficult part of watching these like spaced out like they are, instead of them all being together. Like you get where they went with it and get where they're going with it. And it was a good detour from the main story here, dealing with the Jimmys and also wrapping up Dr. Kelson's story as well, just to kind of see where the world moves forward from here. But it was definitely a really, really good follow-up to a film that we still enjoyed, even though the ending was a little off. But yeah, this was a big step up, man. I really, really walked out of this film liking it, and it helped not having the bar set super high for it, I think, but I was pleasantly surprised with how much I dug this film.
Is it 28 Years Later? The Bone Temple was a solid follow-up to 28 Years Later. I mean, it took quite a while for us to go from 28 Weeks Later to 28 Years Later, but it was worth the wait. Both of them been solid. I will as well give this one a little bit of a nudge or an edge above 28 Years Later, just because I like the psychological aspect that got in here. But it got really dark with the Jimmys. But Ralph Fiennes was really fantastic, giving the more humanity side to the story, while you're getting the fantastic Jack O'Connell giving the insane, over-the-top, brutally violent part of the story. I'm going to give it an 8 overall. I think it was a really solid entry that got me really excited to see the third one, which I was excited to see where the Bone Temple would go from the first one, but I think I'm more excited after this one to see where it goes. Like, it got my excitement level built up a lot more after what they did with this film.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm giving it an 8.5 myself. I really, really enjoyed this movie, and like you said, all the love to Jack O'Connell. He's so good. I want to see him in so much more stuff now that he's kind of really taken off from these two roles in the last year with Sinners and 28, the Bone Temple here. Like, he was in 28 Years Later for a brief minute, but you really see him shine in this
Almost
one.
literally a brief minute.
Because this is very, very much a course correct from the just absurd ending of the last film, and you really dive deep into this cult, and it just tells this unbelievably fascinating story of, just how people can lose a little bit of their humanity and do things when they're desperate to survive, and you kind of really do dive deep into that. They do such a good job of explaining to it. Ralph Fiennes is just a phenomenal actor as well. Just everything he's in is just top notch as well. Like, I love that actor so much, and he gives another phenomenal performance here as Dr. Kelston. But yeah, 8.5 is a good place for me to wind up on it. I'm excited to go back and watch this again. I want to watch them back to back now that I know where the story goes, and I want to go back and revisit 28 Years Later. And once Bone Temple comes out on streaming too, I want to watch them back to back and kind of see how it helps improve my enjoyment of the ending of that film, just knowing where we go with this one now. I kind of do want to watch them back to back and have that continual story guideline from the beginning to now, just to kind of refresh it before the third one ultimately does come out. But I'm excited to revisit it again. Very dark, very intense at times too. This is not for the faint of heart for some people, because it is very gruesome in some aspects. Definitely not one for all ages to watch, for sure.
A lot of nudity, a lot of graphic, gory violence.
Yeah, very graphic violence, like intense, torturous type stuff, to kind of just give a little bit of warning for people who may not have. I mean, if you're watching these films, you kind of know what you're getting into, but just a little extra warning out there for people who may be on the fence of whether they want to watch it or not.
Yeah, I do want to revisit both of these kind of back to back, because, as you said, it just felt so, with the tone of the first film, how the Jimmies were introduced, just felt so, it didn't feel like it fit the movie.
Correct.
But they did such a great job of still keeping that insanity, because you get Teletubby talk and you get Teletubby dances and everything else done in this film. But you get to see the darker stuff behind the silly over-the-topness. And that really, to me, is going to make that ending of 28 Years Later feel a lot better, after you get to see the psychology and the deeper darkness of the Jimmies after that. It was just, like I said, it felt like you had the flipping over the camera. Like, it looked like we were watching Power Rangers mixed with Teletubbies. Yeah. And they literally kind of are, because they are not scared. The Jimmies are not scared at all of the infected. Yeah. Like, they go through the world like no one can stop them. Nothing is dangerous to them. They're the most dangerous thing around, and they prove that for the most part throughout the film.
In a lot of cases, they are correct, but yeah, I kind of want to walk through life with that kind of confidence, you know what I mean? But definitely don't want to be in a cult. But like, it's intense. It's intense. Like, their belief in Jimmy, and their, like, how strong the bond is there, at least in the beginning of the film. Like, just, you see the dedication to it, and just, it's powerful stuff, man. And it's just told in such a way that it doesn't have to be overly complicated, and it's not overly complicated. They do a good job of guiding you along of where, people are at with this, and they believe it, and you see it, and you feel it, and you're uncomfortable in a lot of cases by it. And I think that's the point. You're supposed to be uncomfortable with this, because it's an uncomfortable time in the world, and they just do such a good job of walking that line and taking you along where they don't beat you over the head with anything, but it's very easy to follow along too. And I'm very appreciative of that when it comes to a story, because you don't have to be overly subtle to have to pick up on each and every little thing, but it's there if you want to look for it too. Yeah. And I think that's where they do such a good and effective job with this story.
So 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple is in theaters now. Go check it out. If you do, come over to our Discord or socials. Come talk to us about it and see what you thought about it. But I think if you enjoyed 28 Years Later, you're going to get enjoyment out of The Bone Temple.
For sure. It's such a fun movie, man. I'm glad we picked this one to watch. I'm glad we finally got it here. We were waiting for, even though it was only 6 or 7 months, it felt like a little bit of a long wait to get to this film. And I'm glad we finally got to it, because, man, it was so good, man. We had a lot of fun with it. I was glad we picked this one to review this week, for sure.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting, like I said, to see exactly where that third film goes, because there's there's stuff that we kind of left at the end of this film, like we don't know, is it going to be touched on again? Because we have some characters and some things that just don't exist anymore, but they set some things into motion. And, well, is that going to continue on, or is that just supposed to be another part of, well, we're living in an apocalypse now that kind of stuff happens? Like, we might be leading towards something. Well, now it's gone and over with. There's a lot that they could do with that third film, and I'm really wanting to see how they really go about doing that, and if it is the last one, because again, this is spanning almost 28 years. Yeah. If they're going to keep it going longer than these three films that they planned, like originally, they announced it as a trilogy.
Yeah.
But they said the third one is really going to depend on how the first two perform. But if the third one performs as well, do we get more in this world? Is there enough story and things that they can go in? Because we really haven't pushed it that hard with these two films towards a definite conclusion of a world being kind of closed and stopped. So there's a lot they can do with the third film.
For sure, and it's going to be exciting to see when they get that underway, get it writing, get it out to us, and we can take time to review that too, and hopefully put a nice button on it if it is, like you said, the end of this trilogy, like they're intending it to be, or do they leave open the possibility and leave themselves a little bit of wiggle room to continue it on? We'll see. I mean, we'll yet to see how this one fares at the box office as well. Hopefully it does well enough, but it does sound like they're going to at least get that third film finally done and made, so I'm very much excited about that one for sure. But that's going to do it for us this week. We can't thank you enough again for all your continued support. Thank you for tuning in, and if you feel so inclined to do it, do all the things to help the show out. Give us a like, a follow, a share, comment on our videos, come to our Discord, talk to us from there, subscribe to us on YouTube, anywhere you get your audio podcast. Every little bit of it helps us and helps continue along with this podcast that we love doing each and every week.
You can also become a subscriber over on Patreon to get each and every episode delivered to you early. We're going to be putting out exclusive merch items over there as well. We'll also read your name out, and you'll get to see your name on screen on our video version of the podcast if you're a Patreon subscriber, so you can see your name, hear it read out as a special thank you after every episode. So if you want to check that out, it's patreon.com/we'll bring the popcorn.
And that's going to do it for this week. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode.